Okay, boys and girls, it's Mrs. Pelletier again, and I have another book that is about that big word determination. Remember, I want you to be thinking about why determination is important. And this book is called Ruby's Wish, and this is Ruby right here. And this takes place, 150 years ago in China. And things were very different back then for the way girls and boys were raised and the expectations. So as I read, I want you to be thinking about what Ruby's wish is, okay? So let's go to the title page here, Ruby's Wish. And you see a little paintbrush and a little beret, a little cap. Ruby's Wish. If you walk down a certain road in a certain city in China, past the pet market with its yellow and green rice birds hopping in their bamboo cages and the goldfish and the terrapins in their porcelain bowls, you will come to a block of houses, 5 houses wide and 7 houses deep. Many families live here now, and the buildings are brown with age and dirt. But if you look closely, you will see that once upon a time, this was all one house, the magnificent home of one family. So you can see, they said something right here that you can see the birds in the cages and the goldfish in the bowls and the terrapins in their porcelain bowls. These are the bowls. Terrapins are little turtles, if you can see them right there. But this is explaining to us that this house right here, this used to be one big house that many people lived in. Now many people live, they're separate houses, but it used to be one big house for one family. I'm going to show you what they mean by that. The house was built by an old man who returned from the Gold Mountain. That was what the Chinese called California, when many men left to join the gold rush there, and few came back again. So many times, this was years and years ago, some men from China would leave China, go to California, and the California gold rush was when people would find gold in California. And many times they were saying people left to find gold, but they would stay there because they would make a lot of money. But as I said, this man did come back, see? And he came back very rich. He brought back lots of gold from California. And he did what rich men did in old China. He married many wives. His wives had many sons, and these sons also had many wives. So at one time, the house was filled with shrieks of laughter of over 100 children. Wow. So all of these people lived in all of those houses, but they were one family. Okay, times were very different then. Amongst these children was a little girl that everyone called Ruby because she loved the color red. Ruby is another, actually a ruby is a stone, like a diamond, but it's a red color. So she loves the color red, and they called her Ruby. On New Year's Day, children received red envelopes full of good luck money. Brides wear red on their wedding days, but Ruby insisted on wearing red every day. So, sorry, I forgot this line. It says in China, red is the color of celebration. On New Year's Day, children receive red envelopes full of good luck money. Brides wear red on their wedding days, but Ruby insisted on wearing red every day, even when her mother made her wear somber colors like all the other cousins. Ruby would be up to her jet black hair with red ribbons. So somber colors are darker colors, but she did not like that. She wanted to wear red, and she did. Every single day, even red ribbons in her hair. Because he had so many grandchildren, Ruby's grandfather hired a teacher to come to the house. Any grandchild who wanted to learn could join the classes. This was unusual in China in those days, when most girls were never taught to read or write. So remember how I told you in the very beginning, things were very different back then. So for the most part in China, at that time, only boys could go to school and learn. But in this situation, this grandfather said, if anybody wants to learn, you can sit in on this school, that he has a teacher come and teach them. Whenever the weather was fine, classes were held in the garden. The windows of Ruby's grandfather's office opened onto that garden, and often he would rise from his desk to gaze out of his windows at his grandchildren. So see, you can see most of the kids, well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 little girls of all his grandchildren, and they're all learning how to read and write and do some math too. Okay. One day, Ruby's grandfather looked down from his window to see the high white wall of the garden plastered with calligraphy. See, this is calligraphy. This is their alphabet. His grandchildren had been practicing their handwriting. Ruby's grandfather laughed to see that many had smudged ink on their hands and faces, because they had special ink pens and they almost paint them, okay? This calligraphy. But then he noticed a sheet that was more beautiful than the rest. Which of his grandchildren had produced such wonderful calligraphy? Down in the garden, the teacher was praising Ruby. Her ears were turning as bright red as her jacket. So let's think about that. If you don't know what the word praising means, down in the garden, the teacher was praising Ruby. Her ears were turning as bright red as her jacket. So what do you think that means if she's praising her? She was the one that did the perfect calligraphy. And see, now that's the teacher praising her. So he's saying good things. He's saying nice things about what she did. But if Ruby was doing as well as her boy cousins in her studies, she had to work much harder. Because when the boys had finished their studies for the day, they were free to play. But the girls had to learn about cooking and keeping house. In fact, as far as their mothers were concerned, these were the only things girls had to learn. One by one, the girls stopped going to the classes, all except Ruby. She would catch up on her embroidery at night. Many nights her candle flickered long after everyone else had gone to bed. So again, look at Ruby. She is determined to stay in these classes. So even though she has more work than the boys, because once the boys have done their work, they get to go play. But the girls have to learn how to cook and how to embroider, which is a kind of sewing, and how to keep the house clean. So she had to stay up late to do other things. But now look what happens. She's a little girl here. What does the author do to show us that she's a little bit older? See how her hair is down long? One day the children are asked to write a poem. Ruby wrote this poem, and see how the letters are a little bit different? This is what we call italics. It's a little different from the other print. It's a different font. It says, "Alas, bad luck to be born a girl, worse luck to be born into this house where only boys are cared for." That's what she wrote. Ruby's teacher was very impressed by the poem. He showed it to Ruby's grandfather, and Ruby's grandfather was also impressed, but he was worried about what the poem said. He summoned Ruby to his office. Okay, so let's think about what she said. Bad luck to be born a girl. Worse luck to be born into this house where only boys are cared for. What do you think she means by that? Do you think she's talking about the fact that the boys get to go off and play, they get to go to school? Really, the girls are not supposed to be going to school. So she's upset by that. But he summoned her to his office. That means that when you summon somebody, you call for them to come to their office. So let's see what he says. What do you think that the grandfather's going to say? Ruby found her grandfather sitting in his chair, her poem spread open on his desk. "Did you write this poem?" asked Ruby's grandfather. "Yes, I did, grandfather," answered Ruby. "Do you really think that in this house we only care for boys?" "Oh, no, grandfather," said Ruby, very sorry that she had upset him. "You take good care of all of us, and for that we are all grateful." "Little Ruby," her grandfather said gently, "I really would like to know why you wrote this poem. How are the boys better looked after?" He really wants to know. He could have been very upset with her, but he really wants to have a conversation about this. So that tells you a little bit about the kind of grandfather he is. Let's see. "Well," said Ruby, trying to think of a small, unimportant thing, "when it is the moon festival and we are each given half a moon cake, the boys always get the half with the yellow moon yolk." Said her grandfather, as if he was still waiting. "Is that so?" "Yes," continued Ruby, "and when it is the lantern festival, the girls are given simple paper lanterns, but the boys have red lanterns in the shapes of goldfish, cockerels, and dragons. And see, the girls just get the simple ones, but the boys get all of those fancy ones." Ruby's grandfather chuckled. He'd never thought about it before. He could imagine how much Ruby would have liked a red lantern. So he's starting to think about what she's saying. You know, he could have been a grandfather that just says, "Oh, that's the rules, that's the way it is." But she's gotten him to think about how boys are treated versus girls. So let's see what happens. "But most importantly," said Ruby, staring hard at her red shoes, "the boys will get to go to university, but the girls will be married." See, so most of the time, the boys got to go to college. But the girls didn't go to college, they didn't go to school. They would just get married and then raise their kids. But he says, "Don't you want to be married?" asked her grandfather. "You know you are very lucky. A daughter of this house can marry any man." "I know, grandfather," said Ruby, "but I'd much rather go to university." Ruby's grandfather touched her hair. "Thank you for talking to me, Ruby," he said. "Go on with your lessons. Make the most of them while you can." So I think she's gotten him to think about something. And maybe he's going to change his mind. Let's see. That's what I'm thinking. We don't know. Let's see. So Ruby went on with her lessons. Some of the boys grew up and went away to university. Some stayed at the house and started families of their own. But when they grew up, all of the girls were married and sent away to live in their husbands' homes. Ruby knew it would soon be her turn. In the ponds, Ruby could see the orange and white carp. Those are the fish, the carp, gulping for breath under a thin layer of ice. It would soon be Chinese New Year. Ruby felt sure it would be her last one at home. So how do you think she's feeling right now? Talk to the person next to you. I mean, you can tell by the look on her face, she's thinking this is it. She's probably going to have to get married and be sent away. But let's see what happens. On New Year's Day, Ruby put on red velvet shoes and tied red ribbons in her hair. Then she went to wish everyone a happy new year. She started with her married cousins, then worked her way up through the parents, aunts, and uncles. Each one gave her a red packet full of lucky money. So this is New Year's Day. New Year's Day, Chinese New Year, is a very big celebration. It's a big holiday. Finally, she bowed before her grandfather. "Good luck and prosperity, grandfather," she said. So prosperity means long life. "Good luck, little Ruby," replied her grandfather, and he handed her a very fat red packet. Ruby could feel the eyes of all of her family on her as she opened the lucky red envelope. Can you guess what was in it? It wasn't money. It was something much better than that. So think to yourself, make a prediction right now in your head. What do you think is in this big, fat, red envelope?
No, I'm talking about the I read it.
It was a letter from a university saying that they would be proud to accept Ruby as one of their very first female students. So that's how Ruby got her wish. It's a true story. And how do I know this? Well, Ruby is my grandmother, and every day she wears a little red. So this was a big surprise ending. When I read this book for the first time, I was so excited. I mean, this is very exciting news. She got accepted to university. She would be the very first female student at this university. That's big, right? That's a big celebration. But what's really interesting is Ruby is a real person. Ruby is the author, Sharon Yim Bridges. It's her grandmother. And this story really came true. Her grandmother was the first Chinese woman to go to a certain university. I'm not sure which one. We'll have to do some research on that. Although maybe, let me see if there's a front part here. Sometimes they give you, yeah, it says here, if you walk down a certain road in old China, past the pet market, oh, that was the first page. Past the pet market and its yellow and green rice birds in their bamboo cages and the goldfish in their porcelain bowls, you will find a little girl named Ruby. Ruby is unlike most girls of her time. Instead of getting married, Ruby is determined to attend university when she grows up, just like the boys in her family. And then it says right here, inspired by the life of the author's grandmother and paired with evocative watercolor paintings, Ruby's wish is an engaging portrait of a determined young girl and a family who rewards her independent spirit. So this is a true story. I guess it would be, yeah, it's a story about what happened to her grandmother. So do you see how determination runs through this book? What message or lesson do you think that the author wants us to learn after reading this? This is, Ruby was so determined, and she worked hard and even was able to convince her grandfather, who I'm sure was very traditional for the most part. But you know, he changed it a little bit. He allowed her the opportunity, or any girl for that matter, that was living in that house, to be taught how to read and write. You know, he wasn't necessarily opposed to her even going to university. So he made that opportunity for her. Isn't that interesting? So I think, again, if you set your mind to something and you're determined, you can do it. Sharon Yim Bridges also, you know, she teaches us that lesson by telling us the story. I'm sure in order to write this story, she had to interview her grandmother to ask her questions about what life was like back then. So maybe you could take time today to interview someone in your family and ask them some questions. I did that once with my grandmother. My grandmother, I had two grandmothers, and I called them Yaya. And one time I put a camera up, and I had it set up on a tripod, and I said, okay, Yaya, I'm just going to ask you some questions. And I asked her, you know, where she was born, how did she meet my grandfather, what was it like when she grew up, and I have those memories, so it's really nice. And now what I'd like to do is take those tapes and now make it into a story. okay? So you could become a little interviewer today. Why don't you interview someone in your family and ask them some questions about their childhood growing up, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this Ruby's Wish, another book about determination.